here's what's common in the data, and we'll get to Jesus in a minute, but here's what's common in the data is that people report that once we cross over, we have a life review. And if you're a person who's been a really good person and helped a lot of people, your life review is going to be a very pleasant experience. But if you're somebody who's been angry and jealous and caused mayhem to people's lives, you will experience all this trauma that you caused other people firsthand. You experience it yourself.
Hello and welcome to our episode of How I Made It Through. We have our returning guest, Richard Martini, and I'm so thrilled you are here. We were just talking and talking and talking. I was worried we'd have nothing to talk about, but I don't think that is even a possibility. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Kristin. It's always fun to talk to you. It's always fun to hear your voice. And it does always feel like we're just picking up where we left off, 10 minutes ago or 2 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And, how are you? What's going on with you in your neck of the woods?
What's going on with me in my neck of the woods? I'm doing well. I'm not doing the well, but I'm doing well. Here I am talking to this very prolific author, but I'm writing a book of literary fiction that is inspired by events in my life.
Oh, great.
And I'm feeling very, very hopeful. It's taking a ton of time, but it's been pretty transformative, just the process of writing. And I hope that it one day gets published and one day helps people in their own healing journey.
That's really fabulous. I mean, I must add, that thing of the traditional world of publishing, as we know, it seems to have gone out the window, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing for authors because they can find their own audience. You don't really, as I have, just for the listeners out there who are thinking about writing their own book or doing their own thing, I've been represented by an agent and a manager for most of my career. And when I finished my first book, Flipside, I took it to him. And he said, well, let's send it around. I'll get it to all the majors. And he got it to all the majors. And all the majors said the same thing, which was, who is Rich Martini? And why? How do we get him on Oprah? That was how long ago that was. Or how do we get, him on a talk show? Because who is he? He's not a doctor. He's not somebody who's, famous from that field or even somebody like had a near-death experience. You have a dramatic event, and then you can talk about it. No, I was just an annoying gadfly with a camera asking people questions. So I thought, you know what? I bet I could probably put this out into the world and see what would happen, and maybe people will find it. That's what I thought. So I did that, self-published. This was before Amazon was doing this. It was a thing called some space. I forget what it was. And I did a book talk, and I think this is key to your audience, which is if once you finish your book, see, Kristin, you can go on and talk about it. And you can have people interview you about it. And you already know how to do that. So, but what I did was I took a camera to a coffee shop in Santa Monica and filmed myself talking about my book with the coffee shop owner. Very nice guy who sat me down, and we had this conversation for an hour about Flipside. And then I posted it online. Now, I want to say 10 people were in the coffee shop. 10. I put posters up. 10. Weirdly enough, about 3 of them were friends of mine from high school and grade school, and they just happened to be in town. They happened to all show up, and they were different parts of my life. And then I put it online, and I think maybe 100 people, maybe a couple of 100 people saw it, watched it. But out of that, somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I think you should come and talk to our group, IANS, International Association of Near-Death Studies, because this seems to be in that ballpark. Maybe you want to show the movie? I was like, great. And so then they flew me out to Virginia Beach. It's now a couple of months later. And I do a talk in the Edgar Casey's hometown and also over at his place. And in the audience, somebody comes up to me and says, this is really unusual material, and you are kind of a goofy guy. I think you'd be really good on coast-to-coast radio. And I said, what's that? And he said, oh, I'm going to write the producer a letter. And I thought, oh, isn't that sweet? You know, he's going to write the letter, the head of the studio letter. You should see. Anyway, I get a call from the producer over it, and he says, I got this letter. And they said, you know, when should you be on? And so I was on. This is like 3 months later. Now I'm on Coast to Coast with George
Which is a big
Norrie.
deal.
I didn't know. I had never heard of the show.
Never heard of it.
But I listened to it, and I realized what a good interviewer he is. He makes it feel like he's read everything you've ever written. But the next day, the book was #1 at Kindle.
Wow.
So I thought, oh my gosh, all right, that's the formula. I accidentally stumbled into it.
Stumbled upon it.
So, you know, book talk, get it out there into the world. So that is important. You're already halfway there. You already have an audience. You have a built-in audience for your book. So certainly send it around to all of the prolific publishers that do that sort of thing, because they'll organize it for you.
And what's good is that it's literary fiction. So I don't, if it were memoir or nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, I would have to be a somebody, right? A known entity. I don't have to be a known entity. When it's fiction, yours is not fiction. So you need to be more of an expert. You need to be more of an expert. I can be just a debut author, and if it's well written and a compelling story, I figure I've got as much of a shot as anyone else.
Absolutely, there's that. But at the same time, I just want you to have that plan B. And the plan B is you can
100%.
self-publish it through Kindle, Amazon. Now it's all one-stop shop. And you can put it together and have your hardcover and your paperback out and your Audible out, which you should do, of course, within a few months. And ultimately, once you publish, your fan base, which you already have, will be
Which
attracted.
is massive.
It's huge.
Huge.
I know. It should be. It should be anyway.
It should be. It should be. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's very much in my
You're
mind. There needs to be a strategy. So you brought up, before we were recording, you brought up After Death. And oh, by the way, if people are listening to this on my YouTube channel, I need your help spreading the word. So please subscribe to the channel, like the episode, and it really helps the channel so that more people can get wind of these very fascinating stories. So you were talking about the movie After Death and the intersection with your work and some of your experiences and insights. So I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Very true. Thank you. I got an email from an old friend of mine who said, hey, there's this premiere in Hollywood at the Grove Theater in an hour. Do you think you can make it there? I thought, what? What is this? And then he sent me a link to the film, After Death. And I thought, yeah, I should go. And sure enough, I got there, and I got to meet the director and the producer and somebody whose book is in the film. But on the way over, I was listening to the trailer for the film. And it's basically near-death experiences brought to life through a very terrific reenactment process. So they reenact the near-death experience. They have interviews with the people who went through them. Basically, the filmmaker, Stephen Gray, had his brother-in-law had passed away 7 years earlier and was wondering, like, well, what happened to him? And then he read about this near-death experience, and he made a short film about it. And then he showed that to different people. He showed it to these people as producers in Canada, who then took it to Angel.com, the very successful studio that made the film this past summer, The Sound of Freedom. And, you know, they're breaking the model of how films get distributed. But anyway, so the people who belong to Angel.com voted this short film as the film they wanted to do next. So he had a budget. He went out and he did these reenactments, et cetera, et cetera. But in the trailer, I'm driving over to the premiere, and I hear him a voice say, 23% of near-death experiences have a hellish experience. No. Having researched this for quite a bit and knowing Dr. Grayson, who wrote the Handbook of Near-Death Studies, he also wrote the book After. Preeminent guy, they named the near-death scale after him. He was friends with and worked with Dr. Moody, who invented the term near-death experience. I knew that it's 1 to 3% have a hellish experience. That being said, that's a dark or a hellish experience. But in my research, I've had 200 people recall previous lifetimes, and in 2 out of 200, people had a memory of having a hellish experience after the death that they can recall. So suddenly they're in a dark sulfur place, or they see scary looking people. But when the hypnotherapist asks them, so why are we here? Simple question. It would dissolve. The whole hellish experience just dissipated because they realized it was a fear-based construct, something they had created out of what they thought was going to happen. You see? So in
Right.
near-death studies, they don't ask questions like that. Why are we here? They just report. And I can tell you, because I had to look it up and do a little more research, just to say, wait a minute, how could this be so wrong? As it turns out, when they first started doing this data in the 1970s, Dr. Moody, et cetera, there were no cases of hellish experiences, 0. And then they discovered that some people had initially a hellish experience, and then it transformed into a beautiful experience or angelic experience. Almost like the way Dante's poem goes, it starts in Inferno and works its way up. That's what people were reporting. And so that ultimately, though, the data, and it's across the board, it's 1% to 3%. Okay. Why bring it up? Mainly because I knew that in our, we have a forum over at Quora called Hacking the Afterlife. A lot of people like to weigh in. I knew I would be hearing about it from people who want to believe that hell exists. And there's no other way to put it, because it just doesn't exist in the data and the research and the footage and the reports. Yes, people who've had a near-death experience might have a hellish experience, but then if you revisit it, as I've been doing with people through hypnotherapy, meditation, they can see why it happened. Or, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and I don't want to cut you off, so finish, and then I'll tell you what I was going to say.
Well, I was going to say, the logical thing, there's a couple of logical things here. No two hellish experiences match. When somebody says they see people standing around with horns, you have to think about that for a second, because horns are matted hair and cartilage. So there's nothing inherent evil about having a horn on the top of your head, other than that's something that people have mythologically used forever. Hooves, nothing evil about hooves or even red eyes. I'm just saying, we extrapolate that there's something dark going on.
Well, it's the association. It's the association to it. And so I encourage people, if they haven't, go to NDE Radio. It's with Lee Whitting, who is associated with IONS. And he has so many episodes, but he has an episode devoted to this topic. Why negative, dark, near-death experiences, hellish near-death experiences. And so it's really fascinating. He's quite brilliant. But what I have listened to when I listen to hellish near-death experiences, it is my takeaways is that it's of their own making to some extent because of their fear or what they expect to see. Not all, they would say, no, it's not what I expect to see. Because I'm thinking this one woman, I've been such a good person. Why would this happen? But the moment they recognize that they have a sense of agency, if they ask for a benevolent being, whether it's Jesus, which is very germane to your work, or any other positive association, it's like they're scooped out of that horrible scenario and placed back on the trajectory towards something positive and angelic.
Exactly. I agree with you. But I would also say, in this thing of talking about it being a mental construct, that doesn't mean that people who were bad don't experiencing something hellish. And the reason I say that is because, and look, it really has to do with the data. How many people have you talked to who have had a bad experience? So here's what's common in the data, and we'll get to Jesus in a minute, but here's what's common in the data is that people report that once we cross over, we have a life review. And if you're a person who's been a really good person and helped a lot of people, your life review is going to be a very pleasant experience. But if you're somebody who's been angry and jealous and caused mayhem to people's lives, you will experience all this trauma that you caused other people firsthand. You experience it yourself. Now, a lot of times in my work, I get people, my work, what am I doing? I'm filming people under hypnosis. I'm filming mediums who work with law enforcement talking about direct access to people on the other side. And I'm doing these guided meditations. Divine Counsels in the Afterlife is my book that talks about that. Oh, I'm going to hold it up. Here we go. This
there
one.
It is.
Yeah, there
Take
it
the
is.
sticky off of it so
And,
they can see it.
So, this is 20 scientists, a Harvard neuroscientist, a priest, doctors, all doing a guided meditation where within 15, 20 minutes they were able to talk to people off planet, including their counsels, to ask questions to them directly, like, what's my journey been? And these were all people who didn't know you could do that, but they all ended up doing it. But anyway, we talked about this off air when we started this podcast that I have, Hacking the Afterlife, where Jennifer Schaefer, a medium who works with law enforcement, and I, for 8 years, every week.
8 years?
Yeah, it's crazy. Every week we get together and we talk to people on the other side. That resulted in 4 books. There's Backstage Past the Flip Side 1, 2, and 3, and then Tuning into the Afterlife. And it's basically me asking Jennifer to talk to people, or Jennifer and I talking, and then people show up and want to have a conversation with us. That's the premise. But the podcast has been on for 2 years. The reason I bring it up is 2 weeks ago, and Jesus has shown up on the podcast a few times. And I know that I say that lightly, but it's like somebody is on, we're talking to somebody and they're saying, well, I see Jesus here. And then we go on from there. But in this case, 2 weeks ago, one of the most evil people who's ever existed on the planet showed up. And when people talk to me, they'll say to me, could you interview Stalin or Hitler, or, could you talk to these people? And I always say, look, if I didn't want to spend 5 minutes with them while they were on the planet, why would I want to talk to them on the other side? They're just not people I'm interested in. But in this case, we were having a conversation. 3 scientists showed up. I'll tell you their names were Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and Nikola Tesla. All people we'd spoken to before.
Okay.
And Genghis Khan. Most people don't know that Genghis Khan, do you have any idea how many deaths he was responsible for?
I would imagine it's monumental, like in the thousands.
40 million. So it's more than all the deaths in World War I and World War II and Stalin combined. Now,
God.
So he shows up. And Jennifer says it like, these 3 people here, and he's saying his name is Genghis Khan. She doesn't know who that is.
Well, she didn't know who he was.
Well, I mean, she'd heard his name, but she didn't have any idea why.
Yeah.
And so I just want to point this out, because then he launched into, because I asked him the same questions I ask everybody. What was your experience like? And she said, he's showing me hell creatures from Buddhism. And that was his experience. He went to hell. Okay? Now, for a practicing religious person out there, they'd be like, see, I told you hell existed.
Exactly.
But, let's just do a little bit of logic here. It's not a place that's a tourist destination. It's not like you get to go there and then get out, right? It's not like you go and come back.
Yeah.
And I said, please clarify what you're saying. And what he described, and what Jennifer didn't know, was that the Dalai Lama was named by the grandson of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, named the Dalai Lama
I didn't know that.
Ocean of Wisdom. Well, the Mongolian people are very religious, and they're Buddhists. Not with Genghis Khan, clearly. But at the same time, you have to allow, Genghis Khan was a master warrior, got all these people together, and they went around and they killed 40 million people. But here's what he said. He said towards the end of his life, he couldn't sleep. So it was like a constant thing of just terror, of paranoia, of fear. And then when he crossed over, he was met by all the people he had slaughtered. And
40 million, you said?
Well, yeah, he just said, I was met by everybody that I killed. Of course, his warriors killed all 40 million people. I don't
Right.
know how many hundreds of thousands he killed. He was a
But he
better
was
killer.
responsible for genocide because of
Responsible for
his.
40 million, correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he was saying, and he had this hellish experience of being, and so if I may call that, he had his life review where he got to see all the trauma that and experience it firsthand that he had caused.
Exactly.
But since then, that was in 1277. Since then, he's reincarnated many times. And I
Sure.
said, as what? He said, well, I came back as a monk for a while because I was trying to reconcile what I had done with that different life of service. And then he said, and then I had lifetimes where everything that I did to other people happened to me. So I experienced that. It's almost like when you think of a playwright who's trying to make up all the different plays they're going to create, and they go over every possible ramification. Anyway, that's a long way. I apologize. But it's a long way to get to the sentence where Genghis Khan came through to talk about how he suffered over many lifetimes for the trauma that he had caused other people. And, you know, he's a perfect example of somebody who represented in his era the embodiment of evil. It doesn't get
Right.
any darker than him. In terms of people who knew him. However, there's another weird fact, which is that 1/4 of all Asians are related to him. The Khan blood is in 1 out of every 4 Asians. So,
Okay.
and he jokingly said, I hope the strong part and not the weak part. Meaning, you know, the strength
yeah.
that he had, like, you know, that got carried
Yeah.
on, and not the fears that he embodied.
Well, right. Well, when you think about all the studies around epigenetics and how trauma can be passed in the bloodline, that's a
Well, it's
pretty
a fascinating
scary thought
topic.
if you go there.
No, I mean, it's interesting because, of course, epigenetics is a little squirrely because
It
even
is.
that study that they did was they introduced the smell of flowers, of roses, to mice, and then they murdered them. And then the offspring of the mice that they had murdered, that's the term. I mean, come on.
I was going to say that's quite a specific term
I mean,
for,
they had killed or I don't know
murdered the mice.
but I mean,
Euthanized. There are many
all right,
different
but,
verbs for, yeah.
you've heard me talk about this before, which is all animals are sentient. So
Yes,
basically, you've got a
and-
human saying, "I'm going
Right.
to kill you after having you smell flowers," and
Right.
thank you very much. And then the offspring would smell the roses and have fear. Now,
Yeah, and have a traumatic response.
traumatic response. Now, that doesn't account for the fact that all animals are sentient. It doesn't account for the consciousness of the mouse that was murdered, who is on the flip side going, "Run!" That guy-
Exactly.
That guy's a
Well,
creep.
right. Well, right. There are all these variables that are just not being taken into
But
account
let me
in the
give you
data.
one that's not so dark. But we were talking about this the other day. So they did a study with crows, and there was it was up in Berkeley, and they had a guy who had to go out and he had to capture all the crows and net them and whatever, do what he's supposed to do, some kind of health thing. But he wore a mask, put on like a Nixon mask.
Yeah, I think I know this one. Yeah.
And then so it was,
Nixon
and
mask.
crows lived like 30 years. Animals live a certain amount of time. So it was beyond the 30-year mark, and they had these crows who, when they saw the mask, they completely freaked out because the story had been passed along. So is it the epigenetics? Is it the
Or
bloodline?
are they communicating
Or
in
are
some
they
way?
communicating from the flip side saying, that's the guy I tried to warn you about?
Well, I would say 3. Are they communicating in some way while they're on the planet? Mama and Papa Crow saying, if you see that guy in crow language that looks like Nixon, okay, I'm being ridiculous, but you know what I'm saying.
I know
Or
what you're
from
saying.
the other side.
That's right.
Or it's epigenetics.
So all I can say is epigenetics, for me, seems to be more about the costume that we're wearing rather than it is about our consciousness, because we exist prior to incarnation. We're out there
Yeah.
before we even get here. We plan
So-
our lifetimes, and then once we get
Yeah.
here, we only bring a portion of our consciousness, 20 to 40%. So you
So
see?
I see what you're saying academically and intellectually. I hear what you're saying. I had this experience working with an energy worker. And he was able to identify things in my body that I was like, how did he know that? That's kind of strange. And he would zero in on certain areas without really even touching me. And he would say, in your tissue, I'm sensing here around your shoulder or your hips or your feet, this belief system, and it's not yours. It was your great-great-grandfather's. And he's saying, because he also connects with the other side, and he's saying, they're not talking to me. There's, sometimes they would be talking to him, but he's like, it's coming from your body. Like the body holds consciousness. So I'll tell you this, because we were just talking about how...
No, I understand that that's the theory. I get that
that's the theory. Well, that's the theory, but that was also
Well, no, the theory. You're right. That is the theory, that people believe that your body holds consciousness. But here's the thing. We only bring a portion of it.
Right, of course.
And the rest of it's back home. So we have filters on the brain. I'm pointing to the right about here. Who knows? It could be around here.
The third eye.
We filter out all the information that's back home. So when a person is saying, I'm sensing that there's a problem with your body here, it might not be that he's asking the cells what's going on. He's getting the information. Well, I'll give you an example. I interviewed Edgar Casey on a podcast. Man, this guy, he was a channeler of Edward Casey, and I didn't know that. But we were doing a podcast, and he was like, you mind being on my show? And I said, all right, let's see if we can talk to your guide. And it turns out that was Edgar Casey. So Edgar Casey came forward, and I asked him two questions. One, why were you so wrong with all your predictions? Every prediction you made was wrong. And I said it that way because I was challenging him to see, is this guy going to defend him or what? Because they were. And Edgar said, I was giving likely outcomes. And that's not what happened. Okay, that is what the data shows. That's what the research shows. I said, well, then tell me, why were you so accurate when it came to medical channeling, where he would go into a trance and tell people what was wrong with them? It was amazing. Mark Twain went to see him, and
I didn't know that.
All these famous people went to meet him and talk to him because he was so good at that. And so he would even, he'd go into a trance, somebody would read a letter from a guy who was ill in Germany, and he'd diagnose the problem and give them the cure. He was very good at it. So I said, why were you so good at it? He said, I had a counsel that helped me. Now, the guy that was channeling him had never heard of a counsel before. But I asked Edgar, I said, so what were these counsel? He said they were all doctors, healers. And I thought, he's going to tell me like some famous, Greek Hippocratic. Yeah, that guy.
That dude.
He said, no, none of them have incarnated on Earth. So you have 7 doctors in your council that help you from other realms. He said, yes, they all weighed in on the issue and solved whatever the problem was. So, you see how weird...
Which brings us back, it brings us back to the importance that everyone has the ability to soften/remove their filter. And if we are able to connect with our counsel, what I take from that is we can be more aligned with our soul's blueprint, our soul's contract, whatever it is, if we can tune in, because we've got masterful beings who can say, this is what you are here to do. In the case of Edgar Casey, this is the lane that you really shine in because you're channeling our wisdom.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let me pivot it. So to what extent are you able to channel your own counsel, and what is the lane you are in?
Well, I can tell you that in Flipside, in the first book that I wrote, I did a hypnotherapy session. I didn't think I would get anywhere. But I also thought this was a great way to film myself not getting somewhere, to prove that you can't, whatever. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And I found myself in front of my counsel, and I saw these 8 people, and they all seemed to know me, and there was a weird feeling because it was like I was myself aware of what's going on, and also it was my higher self was aware. So that, like,
I love that.
The whole self was there, standing in front of them, and we got to that question: why Rich Martini? Why me? Why did I choose me?
Yeah.
And then they showed me, and sort of like, and I could see the life planning session, and it was me sort of raising my hand and saying, I think I can help heal people. And I'd had many lifetimes as a healer, different healers, apparently, which I've discovered later. But at this point, I said, I think I can heal people through laughter,
Right.
and through making films. And
Yeah.
because I said, laughter changes your disposition and your health instantly. It can.
Yeah.
Tears work the same, but they require catharsis. Now, I've never used catharsis in a word in a sentence before. Before that time, I can't even use it now. But basically, the idea, you go through the emotion and the tears, and then you get to the healing process. And I said,
cathartic.
I just wish. So I was sharing that I was seeing that I chose Richard Martini because he was going to be a filmmaker, and I said, I just wish I had chosen somebody with more success, and that got a laugh. Who was better at it. So that got a laugh from the council, and it also got a laugh from the hypnotherapist. So it was a very strange experience of hearing laughter on both sides of the veil at the same time.
Wow.
And I said, but I have a feeling that's all going to make sense eventually. And so here we are making sense of it. So my penchant for taking out a camera to film whatever it is I'm hearing or talking about, or asking questions, or being annoying, asking annoying questions.
Questions are important.
So, and that's my lane. So my lane is really, as it appears to be. And, as you know the story, my friend Luana Anders passed away and then came and yanked me into this world because she still existed.
And she wasn't just a friend. What I was starting to understand is like she was a great love of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that seems powerful.
We did, we were together for 20 years. So.
Yeah.
But,
so let me ask you this.
Anyway, how does it work out? And I have seen that we've had previous lifetimes together. So.
Yeah.
Soulmate. Anyway, so how?
And I don't mean in the romantic way. So let me say this. Let me ask.
It was a romantic relationship. No question about it. I just like to, because it started that way, and then eventually it became that we became these best friends. So.
Well, that's why I said that, to qualify it, because I think the association with the term soulmate is that it is it is romantic, and that is sexual romantic, and really soulmates can be with a friend or a colleague or anything where there's some sort of soul contract connection, many lives together. But I want to ask you, because you have, with all the research and relationships and time you've spent with the books and everything that is shaped who you are today and what you believe today. When did this research start? Like 20 years ago, 15 years ago? How long ago did this start for you?
Well, when Luana passed away in 96, she started showing up. And I discounted it and dismissed it. Yeah. Like, I must be imagining that. But then she started showing up to other people. So then I knew that she existed. So then it took another it was like a year after she passed away, I started studying Tibetan philosophy with Robert Thurman, because she had been a Buddhist, and I thought, maybe that's the key, maybe that's their thing. That didn't turn out to be the avenue, but then it was probably about 10 years after that I first stumbled across the Michael Newton work, and I thought I'd make a documentary.
Okay, so let's take you Michael Newton, and you're starting to move in that direction and filming people and doing the documentary. How do you live your life daily, just moving through the world, that is different than it would have been 10 years ago, 20 years ago, with all that you are learning and experiencing?
Well, I think what it is that look, I know that I used to do comedy improv. I used to do an improv class, and I knew that there's a certain amount of in the moment. What is the moment? What is the reality of the moment? And I have a certain, a weird sense of humor about certain things. And so I would find myself, no matter where I was on the planet, the more I would resist doing this work, working on movies or doing whatever the more it would show up in front of me. While I was working on the movie Salt, Philip Noyce's film, Angelina Jolie, I was talking about this research to one of the actors, and he said, this isn't a documentary you're talking about. This is a book. You should turn it into a book. And it was that conversation that made it into its first book, because I realized I don't have to edit that. I can just take the transcripts and let people see what it was. And that led to then a New York police detective pulling me into a room and saying, "What do you know about possession?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, my daughter is seeing a ghost." And I said, "Okay, who's the ghost?" And he said, I showed her a picture of my partner. She said, "That's him, Daddy, but he's thinner and has hair now."
So he's younger.
And he said, how could my anyway, so how could my partner, I told you the story, how could my partner...
You hadn't. This is fascinating.
But, you know, he wanted to know how his partner who died 10 years ago could be showing up to his 8-year-old daughter thinner. Okay. And so, as I pointed out, people can show up how they want to show up on the flip side. And their favorite look, it's fine.
Yeah.
And I said, but more importantly, is this a friend of yours? Was this guy a friend of yours? Because I didn't know. He said, I loved him. I said, well, is it so bad while you're at work, saving the planet, he's in your house, keeping an eye on your 8-year-old daughter? He said, well, not when you put it that way. So ultimately, and I know if I could, the question kind of goes into, so here I am making this documentary about people talking about the afterlife and connecting to people in the afterlife. Me finding my friend Luana in her classroom in the afterlife.
Right.
And then it was this friend of mine who came to me and said, I'm having a real hard time. My mom passed away, and I really want to talk to her. And I didn't know Jennifer Schaefer at the time, but I did know Scott Tatamble, the hypnotherapist, lightbetweenlives.com. And I said, Scott, why don't you do a session with her? I'll film it. So we did. And in that session, she went back to a lifetime where she remembered being in Jerusalem in the year 18. That's what kept coming to her mind. And that was the first time I said, well, ask her. I wrote him a note. Here's my Post-it. Ask her if she knows Jesus or, she ever saw him. And he says, he doesn't say it directly. He just says, have you ever seen anybody in public speaking? And she said, I'm standing 10 feet away from Jesus. It's taking the breath out of me. And, I'm both Scott and I are looking at each other like, what? And so now he has her go closer and talks to, she's listening to him talk, and she's talking about the love that's coming off the guy. And it's in the book. It's reproduced in, The Greatest Story Never Told. But that was the first time that happened. And I'm filming it. And I'm thinking to myself, how did it get to be that me as a filmmaker am sitting here filming this moment? And then I left it be a chapter in Flipside, but then I kind of avoided talking about it because it just kept happening. He kept showing up. And then finally, it wasn't until Hacking the Afterlife that it's like a third of that book are those stories about Jesus showing up. And then, as you know, it wasn't until so many years later that David Kirkpatrick, the former head of Paramount, said you should write a book about the chronological order of what you've heard about Jesus' life.
So let me slow you down again. Here we are. So that is the story of how this evolved because, on the surface, you didn't choose it. It chose you, but you're just following the breadcrumbs and tuning in. So what I'm asking is with all of this exposure and the mundane, you wake up in the morning, you make coffee, how has all of this wisdom shifted you? Because I can speak for myself. Interviewing so many people and doing the research, I do very casually, just out of pure curiosity, feel compelled to do it. It has changed me, right? The way I
how
treat
you relate
myself,
to other
treat other
people,
move through difficulty and strife, move through good times, who I am as a wife and a mother and a daughter, and how has it changed you?
Well, I would say, and it's a great question, I would say that it's changed me in the sense that I find anything somebody tells me not completely weird or strange. So, it doesn't matter what somebody tells. So if I ask somebody, did you have a dream last night? And they start telling me their dream and they go, oh, I must have made this up. It's so weird. Instead of going, well, let's just examine it. Why don't we just talk about it? What I've found is that everybody that I've spoken to, and there's so many people, like I mentioned with divine counsels in the afterlife, that came out of a challenge. A friend of mine just said, why don't you try it with these scientists and just see what happens? And I didn't know. I thought, maybe the odds are going to be half of them talk to councils and half of them don't. And, some of them saw Jesus. Some of them saw the angel Gabriel. Some of them saw an angel Michael. Some of them saw aliens on their council. And I try to just let go of the instant reaction of most people have is fear. Like, how do I deal with that? And just allow that there's a reason I'm hearing this, and there's a reason that it's in front of me. So do your job and ask the questions that you ask everybody. So, Mr. Alien, can I ask you some questions? And then they can say no, or they can say yes. Or, Mr. Jesus, could I ask you a question? And he can say, not today, no. I've never had him say no yet. I have had some people on council say, because I don't know who I am. Who are you? I don't know who you are. And I'll ask them, do you know who I am? And if they say no, they're sometimes reluctant to give up information. Because I'll say, so what do you think about this person's life path and their journey? And they'll say, like, I don't know who you are. Why are you asking these questions? But the person next to them on the council goes, of course I know who you are. We love what you're doing. This is fantastic. So when you hear somebody off planet, again, this is a person, a scientist I'm talking to, who's never talked to anybody outside of their world. Now is having a conversation with somebody who's a wise being on the other side, and I'm asking them, ask them if they know me, and they say, I don't even know how they possibly could, Richard, but they're telling me
but they do.
That not only do they, but they encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. So that's how it's changed me. I'm under the
you're stepping into what I hear is you're stepping into your soul's contract, a simplified way of doing it.
That's right. Sure.
Yeah, of saying all this information. I could easily go, well, that's really weird. And then you want a cup of coffee and where are you going for, whatever. Keep going. But you're like, I recognize, what was that Freudian? Like sometimes a cigar is not just a cigar or whatever. You're realizing, that you have, I don't know what the word is, whether it's an opportunity or perhaps an obligation or.
I think it's more on the obligation side because.
Yeah.
The thing that probably affected me the most, I would say, when I think back, like, what am I doing? And that was a book talk that I gave in Santa Monica, and a woman came with a copy of Flipside, and it was like dog-eared and Post-it notes in it. And she raised her hand, and I said, how are you? How are you doing? And she said, I just wanted to look you in the eye and say, thank you for saving my life. Her daughter had died. She was having a hard time getting through the day. And somehow, and as I'm fond of saying, it's not me. It's these people. I'm just giving testimony. I'm filming them, and they're saying these things. Yeah. So I realized that's not a review I'm ever going to get from a movie. So no matter how many scripts I write. How many movies I make.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. I'll never get that review.
That's right.
So that puts an obligation on you, at least to help people where you can, if you can. And really it's about eliminating stress and fear. And I've been asked this question a number of times, which is this research, does this prove that religion is accurate? Because are you talking about faith, about, the idea of there is an afterlife? Since we don't think we can know it, it must be a faith issue. It must be a belief in issue. And I keep saying it has zero to do with religion. It's data, it's research, and it's experiences. And when people tell you their experience, instead of putting it off and saying, I don't believe you, or that couldn't have happened, allow people to share their reality. And if you do that, eventually you'll see that their reality, their experiences on the flip side, are consistent. They have all the same hallmarks. Talking to guides, talking to teachers, talking to wise beings, seeing Jesus, but also Krishna. But then if you ask those individuals, is the religion that's based on your appearance accurate? They all say the same thing. It's metaphor.
Yeah.
Don't take it so literally, because you're not really seeing the picture at all. Try to drop all your beliefs, which is really hard to say.
Which is really hard, especially to someone who's really zealous.
And focus on your own experience. So, and you can do these experiments on your own. You can talk to your grandmother. You can ask them questions. And if you keep doing it, I mean, they say, call your mother. Call your mother on the phone. Well, call your grandmother on the phone too. And it's not so hard to do. And it's 10 minutes a week, month, where you say, Grandma, I just want to have a conversation with you. Now, A, how are you doing? Who are you hanging out with? Who are you surprised to see over there? You got any tips for me about how to get through life? Yeah. How hard can that be?
Yeah. Well, the same goes of the guides. Back to that idea that they are uniquely part of your counsel for whatever you're here to do, whatever you're here to do.
No, I think that's absolutely right.
Time goes by so fast.
No,
I know. I feel like we're just getting started. I know, it's going by so fast. So as a final parting question, is there something that you haven't said yet that feels so like, as you are connected with your divine counsels, that you really want to impart with people? They listen to this and they go, I heard that.
So let me say this, which is, in our podcast, Hacking the Afterlife, if you want to hear what people should hear, past month, we've had unbelievable conversations with people who've come through to say, just love the person you're with, love more, love better. And there is an example in the movie After Death. This guy sees Jesus, and he's very smitten and crazy about it, and he's crying and sobbing, and he says, Jesus, what do I do? What do I tell people? How do I tell them about this experience? And Jesus says to him, just love your partner. And the guy says, wait a minute, I'm here. I have to go share this message with the world. And he says, no, you're not here listening to me. Just love your partner. But he comes back from the experience. His wife doesn't believe him. He then goes on and becomes a preacher, and his children abandon him, and now he's completely disconnected from his family. And it's like, what part of just love your partner wasn't clear? It's what we hear in the research over and over again. Love. Learn to love. Learn to let go. Try to love unconditionally if you can. That's
beautiful. It's perfect. It's a perfect place to end.
To begin.
Thank you.
Perfect place to begin.
Right? It is the perfect place to begin. Well said. Well said. Thank you, as always.
Thank you, dear.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.